good morning to our weekly morning briefing, which initially was first of all focusing on updates on Russia's invasion in Ukraine. But we have started to look beyond this topic also on trends in the region and beyond the region. And I think it's very important also to discuss how the war impacts on other post-Soviet countries and what trends we also have in other post-Soviet countries in the shadow of this war. I think Georgia is a key country for the Eastern neighborhood policy of the EU. I think it's a very important country in terms of the reforms it made a couple of years ago, but also as a free space for civil society and also for the neighboring countries or actors from the neighboring countries to meet. So I think it was for many years one of the key reformers, but also one of the key free states in the entire post-Soviet space and region, we have to say. Nevertheless, I think we observe a democratic backsliding since years in Georgia. So it's nothing new now with the foreign agent law. The ruling party, Georgian Dream, brought their foreign agent law in the first reading into the parliament 2 weeks ago. And we could observe several mass demonstrations by civil society, and then the withdrawal also of this law. That does not mean that the law will not come. I think we see at the moment a massive information campaign of the ruling party and actors around the ruling party, let's call it like this, against non-governmental organizations, independent media, also specific persons are discredited. So I think there is a preparation of the ground maybe to reanimate or to bring it back on one point. And I think there are clear goals of the government and the ruling party, or maybe first of all of the ruling party, to prepare for the 2024 parliamentary elections. And I would even argue to stop also EU integration process, because that could undermine the power position of the ruling party. I think the EU and its member states for too long appeased the increasingly authoritarian GD government, too soft, too little criticism from the member states, particularly, and also from the EU. And I think we now are facing really a further stage of this authoritarian path. And we should not forget that Georgia is in a very difficult also geopolitical situation with Russia as a neighbor, Armenia and Azerbaijan also in a very difficult security situation, with occupied territories also, or disputed territories. I think it's a very, very sensitive situation. We have excellent speakers today. And I'm also happy, I also wanted to announce that this is a cooperation with DGAP, with the Georgian Institute for Politics. We try also a little bit to change the format and have cooperation, and also have people from the region itself, so to build also a bridge between the region. I first introduced the speakers, and then I would hand over to Kakachia, the director of Georgian Institute of Politics, just to give a short intro also from his side. Speakers are today Nino Lomjara, who is the former public defender of Georgia. She's a lawyer, and she has worked also for election monitoring organizations in the past. So a very experienced person also on elections and human rights issues. Warm welcome for you, Nino. It's great to have you. We have Mariam Nikuradze, who's a journalist at OC Meta, Open Caucasus Media. And she followed very closely the demonstrations also and the law itself. And OC Media is one of the few really independent medias in the Caucasus, really very excellent also reports and articles of developments in the entire region. So it's great to have you also here at this morning discussion. And we hopefully have already, or will have soon, Dorota Dlouchy-Suliga, who is head of the division for Georgia, Republic of Moldova, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus at the European External Action Service in Brussels. She also worked at the EU delegation to Georgia, so she was also based for the EU in Georgia and has really a very good regional also expertise. Cornelia, I would just hand over to you, and then we start with Nino.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I think this is a very timely discussion on Georgia's current challenges. As you know, we have internal challenges as well, external challenges related, actually interrelated to each other. And I think the problem, as Stefan mentioned, is that Georgia is already backsliding for a few years. And we don't see that there is any hope that things will get better. Unfortunately, some of the reasons of this backsliding are very systemic, and it has something to do with the political culture of Georgia. And one of the reasons is also, of course, it's not like the main driver probably, but one of the driver is also the so-called unwritten rule of the Georgian politics, where we have this political vendetta last 30 years. And unfortunately, this is also impacts of this polarization which we have in Georgian politics. Plus, all these events related to this, the law which ruling party actually introduced to Georgia. We all saw that, how this Georgian society actually reacted. And thanks God that, the Georgian society and especially civil society, free media is very important. And I think this was the reason why Georgian Dream also tried to bring this law, because they understand from last year when there was a manifestation in June that, they understood that Georgian political opposition is quite marginalized by the ruling party. So what they understood is that potential challenger who can challenge them for next year's election, for parliamentary election, is civil society and free media, because they are not able to control them. And I think the idea behind of this was somehow to marginalize civil society, which was not easy task, and I think they miscalculated a little bit. But of course, as Stefan mentioned, this is not over, and because the character of the regime, actually tells that there can be some other attempt to this. And another point is also could be very important is that how Russia reacts to the situation. And I think that what is happening in Georgia right now with the ruling regime, this is like music to the ears of the Kremlin, because they understand that the more authoritarian Georgia becomes, they become much closer to Moscow and much far away from the Brussels. So I think this is a very challenging situation in Georgia. And I hope we will have some very fruitful discussion during this workshop, and there will be also some other opportunities to interact with participants as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cornelia. Dorota is now also with us, and I would just directly hand over to Nino to describe also, as the former public defender, a little bit also the environment in which all this is taking place now, because we had just a focus on this foreign agent law, but I think we have to see it in a wider context also of developments in the country, and I think it would be good to lay this ground here. So please, 7-8 minutes, please, not much longer.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much for introducing me. Well, it's a really difficult task to describe the whole context and the history, how we came to this point in 5 minutes, but I really try to be brief. Well, in 2012, when Georgian Dream government came to power, and since 2012, for a number of years, we have witnessed a number of important human rights reforms. We've been praising some of them. There were really some important, reforms introduced with regards to anti-discrimination legislation, strengthening equality mechanism in Georgia, strengthening public defender's office. There was was also established independent investigative mechanism to investigate abuse of power by law enforcement agencies, and this institution worked really independently. And public defenders have been also elected through the consultation with the civil society and through the nomination of the civil society groups. Of course, there have always been problems in Georgian democracy under any governance, and we always considered that we are a transitional democracy, and we had challenges with regards to independent institutions, with regards to protection of human rights. But more or less, during first years, there was more positive trend rather than negative. Although there have been signs, naturally. Many people are asking question, when was this turning point when we, when we can say, after which we are saying that there was no any progressive initiative coming from the Georgia ruling party, or well, I think that it has happened. For me, this turning point was after the Gavrilov's night dispersal. Probably many of you remember when Russian MP appeared in the chair of the speaker in the parliament of Georgia, and it caused wide public while protest, people were gathering in the street and protesting this what has happened in the parliament of Georgia, and this protest rally have been brutally dispersed by the law enforcement. They used excessive force, they used rubber bullets against the protesters. Some of them lost their vision, eyes, and etc. And after this event, when I was a public defender and me and human rights defenders were insisting the law enforcement's prosecution's office to investigate excessive use of power and to identify who has ordered illegal use of force against protesters, instead of identifying and finding who was guilty who issued illegal order, well, government started persecuting the protesters. And that momentum was for me probably the turning point when I started thinking that the government has changed its policy and they became more repressive rather than human rights oriented. There were also a number of problematic elections during last several years. It was probably 2019 presidential elections, 2020 parliamentary elections. We always had problematic elections in Georgia, but those two elections was especially problematic because we have witnessed widespread electoral fraud. We have witnessed pressure, threatening physical attacks. Well, there was a leak of information from, and there were whistleblowers who were talking about how this electoral fraud, what was the system of electoral fraud, and they talked about voter, they talked about well, electoral manipulations, how it worked, that some, high-ranking political officials were engaged in this, system of how to falsify the elections. We also received, I was a public defender, and I received dozens of complaints from ordinary citizens working in public or private sector, saying that they were under severe pressure just because they were family members or friends or relatives of opposition party, either candidates or just activists. But, we have more or less witnessed this kind of problems during previous other governments, during previous elections, but there was something new in Georgian context, something really unprecedented, which was the rhetoric that the ruling party leaders and some leading members of the government were using against our strategic partners. And that was the language that has never been used before by any government officials during the history of Georgian government. And that was really shocking for everyone, for even the voters of the ruling party who voted Georgian Dream, not because they believed that Georgian Dream was openly pro-Russian and anti-European, political party. They really truly believed the Georgian Dream was a pro-Western political party. But this has happened after elections 2020, especially this change of the rhetoric was so obvious after Russia attacked Ukraine, and the statement from the Prime Minister after a few days after Russia attacked Ukraine, when he said that, the war is in Ukraine, we are here, we have, we should continue doing our business as usual, nothing is happening in Georgia. So this was totally shocking for everyone, and people started, realizing that it is not just about internal politics and policy, it's about our country's foreign policy orientation. One thing I have mentioned that was, ruling party members started attacking ambassadors here of our strategic partners, like EU ambassador, US ambassador. They started verbally attacking and discrediting members of the European Parliament. Well, I'm not just talk about how they demonized and discredited all members of the civil society organizations. Well, I was under permanent attack, but more or less it was like we got used to live in such a situation, but really unprecedented was the manner of attacking, how they started, discrediting the Western values and Western institutions in Georgia, which was very similar to the rhetoric that is going on in Russia. Also important and very negative thing that was happening in Georgia during last several years was strengthening far-right extremist groups in Georgia, backed by Kremlin and having direct and open ties with Russian politics. And this group of people, it was obvious during the last few years that the government or high-ranking officials either backed these people or covered these people. And the illustration of this was 5th of July dispersal, when far-right extremist groups and leaders organized brutal attacks against journalists and LGBT plus community in the streets of Georgia, and the police did not prevent this attack, I would say. There was the statement—
One more minute, please.
Yes, preceding to this attack from the Prime Minister, other high-ranking officials, which I consider was kind of incitement to violence. And after the dispersal, the law enforcement agencies did not investigate and persecuted the organizers of violent attacks against peaceful journalists and peaceful citizens. So, yes, this is how we came to this point. There was a joke among, human rights defenders and among, in Georgia, that at least we are not announced as a foreign agents. So we were joking that at least we don't have, foreign agents law. And suddenly, just a few months ago, we have heard the initiative of the ruling party that they are preparing to initiate the Russian law in Georgia, and and we realized that here we are. This is something that makes Georgia Russian like Putin-style regime and well establishes the authoritarianism in Georgia. And we started mobilizing, and I think that we faced this challenge. We were prepared for this. We knew that we are coming to this point. We had the experience of our Russian, Belarusian, Azerbaijani, and other colleagues from other countries. And I think that our civil society was ready for this. And I think that we have successfully address this first, attempt to cement the authoritarianism in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this overview. I just hand over to Mariam, maybe also looking on this specific case and also the demonstrations, situation in civil society and also independent media, which is also very much under pressure, and it also depends on external funding. So I think that's a very important element also of bringing a balance also into the whole discourse and system. Please, Mariam.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I also wanted to start with a joke that actually OC Media was listed on the Russia's foreign agent registry about a year and a half ago. I mean, we are not registered because we are not based in Russia, but they listed it as one of those enemy organizations that is leading anti-Russian activities somewhere outside the Russia. And then we were joking that it's so nice that we are in Georgia and something like this doesn't threaten us here. But yeah, then very soon we had to come to this reality where the threat of being labeled as foreign agent became real. Just to briefly explain this, what this draft law would mean, it was completely unnecessary because transparency of the funding, transparency of the civil society organizations and media is already provided by the Georgian law, and actually government members and the authors of this draft law numerous times admitted it was true. So there was no necessity to have this draft laws. It would achieve the main goal to basically ruin our reputation and marginalize our organizations. When it comes to media, for me, the turning point was, yes, 5th of July, because that was the day when we lost the feeling of security, because I've been a journalist for 14 years, and all this time my press badge meant protection for me. But now there are many, many cases when I'm going to cover a protest, I'm thinking, is this the day I take my press badge, or is this the day I'm taking my helmet and hide my identity? And just recently, when Altinfo removed the EU flag from the parliament and they burnt it, I actually was working undercover there, because I think if they discovered I was from the independent media, it would have been very dangerous for me to be there with the press badge. But yeah, security for me is a huge issue. It's not. It has never been so dangerous to be a journalist in this country before, more than ever. But also at the same time, the freedom of media and freedom of speech has never been in such bad state in our country, under such a threat. It's not only security, but also having the director of the Tavari channel in jail, or all the financial pressure on media, and of course the threat of this draft laws was direct threat for the free media as well. And what is also concerning me, I don't personally think that this specific draft law will be back, but I think there are two dangerous draft laws that are still shelved. One is something that this People's Power who drafted this draft laws, they threaten that they are working, and they have actually finished working on the draft law about media, which I would characterize as a censorship law. It's a censorship law. They call it something about disinformation laws or defamation, law, but it basically gives such a freedom that it would be possible to censor media. And the second one is anti-LGBT law, which is submitted, draft law, which is submitted by the far-right groups. And I think it may come, it's in the parliament, it hasn't been discussed yet, but I think we will see at some point this draft law on the table of discussions. And these are the two things that I'm concerned very much at the moment. Now I will briefly talk about, I know I don't have much time, but I will talk about the protests. For me, in this past 14 years, the times when I've seen the biggest protest was twice. It was last year when we didn't receive the EU candidate status. I think this was the biggest protest I've seen in my life. And second time it was now after the foreign agents draft laws were in the parliament. But here I want to explain a little bit. This protest started small. Actually, it was just us, media outlets, and some civil society organizations protesting inside the parliament with the banners saying how bad it would be for our future. I think it was in the beginning not clear for everyone why we were protesting this law, but I think free media and civil society, and as well as our Western partners, made a good job explaining why this law was not necessary and why it was dangerous for our European future, which is why I think people came out in the streets, because once again, I think they were protesting their, not protesting, but they stood there for their European future, because this is very important for Georgian people. And as you know, vast majority of Georgians are for joining the European Union. And also, another thing that triggered the scales of the protest was the lie of Georgian Dream. I think it was Tuesday. They said that they would consider the draft law for first hearing on Thursday, and then all of a sudden, even though they scheduled it on the agenda, all of a sudden they announced, being inside the parliament, that hey, we are starting to discuss it now. And I think it angered a lot of people, which is why we've seen so many people just return from the morning protest and others joining in. And also another unique thing for me was this resistance to the riot police. I mean, I've covered a lot of dispersals, including Gavrilov's night. There was this dispersal after the election in 2020, and so on. There were many of them. But usually police would disperse people, and then the protest either would resume in the smaller scales, but yeah, that would be it. But this time it was 2 days in a row. And on the second day, even though everybody were so tired, I mean, the protesters, I think we went home at 6 a.m., even though we were there for basically 2.5 days standing outside the parliament. Which and also a new thing was how even school students were there. I mean, the most visible people on the front line, apart from other protesters, were these school students, really angry, resisting to the police and showing their bravery. I think it played also a big role in finally us seeing the draft law fail. Today, I will finish where we are now. Today, even though the draft law is failed, I think Georgian Dream and their propaganda channels and these radical groups are using this law in practice, basically already labeling us foreign agents whenever they need, and also people who spoke up against this draft law are being targeted by trolls, and they receive threats. It's a situation, if you ask me, it's quite tense at the moment, even though there are no protests outside the parliament. And I think this will unfortunately continue because, yeah, there is no proper pressure on the government from the opposition, which is too weak, and soon the elections is coming. And I think Georgian Dream is desperate, and they are going to do anything basically to stay in the power. So, yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that was also very useful in explaining what other options are there, and also how I think this field of insecurity, I think that's really a big issue which has changed for several groups, not only for journalists but also for other groups. So I think that's really a big shift in Georgia. So let's shift to Dorota from the European External Action Service. Thank you for joining us also here. I think that all happens in the framework of the opportunity of a candidate status for Georgia also to the EU. My impression is this government is spoiling exactly this this candidate status with all this action at the moment. And then we have Russia also, with its pressure on other post-Soviet countries. How this is seen from Brussels and from the External Action Service perspective, these developments.
Thanks, Stefan. It's difficult to speak after Nino, Mariam, and you being also outsider and the diplomats in Brussels. I have to be sometimes more optimistic, probably, because I see still a European future of Georgia, and we are trying to work on delivering this somehow in response to Georgian citizens' wishes. Indeed, situations like foreign agents law do not help us to help Georgia. It was extremely moving to see people going on the streets in order to defend European ideas, European values, and to see clearly that Georgian population shares European values, and this is the main issue to become a member of the club, as I would call EU. The law was withdrawn, but we share the concerns of civil society and expressed by Nino and Mariam before, that not necessarily the spirit of the law was withdrawn. And this is our messaging also to ruling party from Brussels, that not only the law should not be there, but this is the obligation also under international conventions, etc. And as they wish to join the EU, to make sure that there is an environment for civil society, that actions like posters with faces of the civil society leaders are not acceptable, that this is something that would harm their prospects of becoming the EU member. But I would like to go back a bit because, you know, there are all fundamentals in Georgia are present. I think, of course, now in Ukraine, we may see more support for the EU than in Georgia, but this is the only country in the Eastern Partnership where this support was constant. For last 15 years, we see 80% of Georgians wanting to be closer to the EU and join the EU. And this is important because governments come and go, but the population is there, and the population clearly speaks that they would like to see Georgia in Europe, and this is important indication for us. We see also, you know, that there is. The Georgian government very much likes to refer to the report of the Commission on the acquis implementation on technical issues. That there is very good, the best in the region administration that can deliver if there is a political will. And this is also important fundamental for our cooperation with Georgia, that there is this capacity on Georgian side to deliver if there is political will. And there's this very strong civil society which can mobilize also people around, like we saw recently. You know, I agree that things are in the past few years, and we have been vocal on this, are not going in the direction we would like to see exactly on human rights, on election and so on. We do remember that this democracy is still very young, that there is not, what Georgian democracy, even though it's very vibrant, I would say, lacks is experience of democratic change of power, which makes almost all elections existential for all political parties. And this, of course, radicalizes the language used in the process. It's also, as the elections are seen as existential and moving to opposition is not really moving to opposition, but it's the risk of being wiped out. This influences quite a lot the political culture, and unfortunately, I don't have, other than more experience in democracy, easy recipe how to change it. But indeed, as Nino mentioned, Mariam, the language used by actually many political actors in Georgia is counterproductive to A, depolarization, B, getting closer to the EU. And indeed, we were worried. I think recently one of the politicians in Georgia even questioned visa liberalization as the success, which we thought always that this was a deliverable for people in Georgia. So we are worried about the rise of anti-Western language. We also addressed this with actually everybody, because I'm not sure if politicians in Georgia somehow realize that there's nothing that can be done for internal consumptions in the context of elections. We are living in the global village, and there is no statement that is only for internal consumption. We listen to this in Brussels and also in member states. And this is important because it's not about perceptions, it's not only words. It's about values. It's about positioning the country vis-a-vis Russia and Russian aggression against Ukraine. But I also realized that there's some homework on the EU side. In order for us to have leverages, in order for us to make sure that we can have carrots and sticks vis-a-vis countries that explicitly want to join the club. So they are explicitly saying that they are ready to follow the rules of the European Union and of the club they want to join. We need to make enlargement process credible again, because after many years of Western Balkans, when everybody saw Western Balkans being in its freezer and in waiting mode, this process is not as credible, and then it cannot be as big leverage as it was in 2004 for the first enlargement into the East, where it really worked as useful to change and democratize the countries.
One more minute, please.
Yes, and unless we will work also on this, it's very difficult. The other point that is, of course, requires from our side more explanations and communications is that we are working also in Brussels very much on limiting foreign influence, foreign disinformation, manipulation of information. We are working, as you know, we banned some Russian TV stations. We are working also on making sure that Russian finance lobbying, malign lobbying is not present in Brussels. And this work, which is happening in Brussels, can be misused for the political purposes in many countries outside the EU, but also within the EU. And this is very important to make sure that how we communicate about our work and how our work is fully in line with the human rights standards and the objectives that we have, but also to make sure that this is not misused. And this was also why we stand up so strongly against the law on foreign agents. And I was happy to hear from Mariam that this very clear message from Brussels and capitals helped in diffusing the situation in Tbilisi. That's it on my side.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for this very clear words. I really would now invite the auditorium to raise hands. You can also ask a question in the chat, but I would prefer to have direct questions. So please just come in. I just see one first question here in the chat about this question. When does it, from Jäger Grünefeld, while Gavrilov's night may have been the visible turning point, wasn't the political turning point after the 2016 election when GD gained a constitutional majority and sheet its former coalition members. The constitutional reform after that kickstarted further hollowing out of democratic checks and balances. So the question, if it was not already 2016 election with the constitutional majority, I think that would be the first question. I also want, since nobody else is at the moment coming in, okay, there's someone coming in. Okay, then the colleagues are coming in, but yeah, that's nice. Okay, then I keep my question and start with Josef. I would collect questions and then I give it back to you because we don't have so much time. So I would do one big round and then everybody has a chance also to react to each other and maybe add also what you want to add. So Josef, please.
Yeah, Josef from also DGAP. I work as student assistant. And I was wondering, because one formulation sparked my interest, government come and go, about the Georgian government. And I was curious about whether, because we have several cases of, I guess, autocratic consolidation, executive aggrandizement, where electoral change is, yeah, very unlikely. I mean, Hungary is one example, but there's several, about whether that's already, we can see, yeah, I guess signs for that in Georgia, or whether then we shouldn't change as the European Union and member states our policy toward away from cooperation with the government and more towards civil society, if possible.
Thank you. Anastasia?
Good morning. I'm Anastasia Polchumban. I'm also working at the DGAP on the Eastern Partnership think tank network. My question, yeah, I think it's probably more to Mariam and Nino. So my question is, what are the chances that people can really influence what's happening? And how long do you see that going on? Because I think this government is not also leave the power and not let it go. So I wonder, and I have been in Georgia in September for interviews, and it seems that the mood is quite low as well. People are fighting, but it's like every step and every new thing has to be pushed back, and the government is still implementing and achieving their goals. So what has to change, and how do you see the future of civil society, which is so vibrant in Georgia? Thank you.
Thank you. Katja?
Good morning. My name is Kakachia. I'm program director in Center for Liberal Modernity. Thank you very much to invite me and for very interesting statements. I have a question to Dorota. So we all know, so currently in Georgia, both in the government and also in the opposition and in civil society, is a very main question. So will Georgia get the candidate status at the end of the year or not? And it is really a matter of life and death, I would say. And the society is extremely polarized, and both sides, I mean the government side and opposition side, which is together with civil society, so call others traitors. And I think the civil society is aware that the most important issues, such as judicial reform and democracy and free media, and also the polarization, will not succeed by the end of 2023. And my question is, so what should we expect from the EU? I mean, the 80% the Georgian population. And if we do not get the candidate status in 2023, does it mean that this chance is over? And how the EU will explain this? Or is the EU thinking about this to wait until the very important elections in 2024? Thank you.
Then I used the opportunity to ask maybe two questions by myself. How you would factor in Russia? So what is the impact of Russia? Is it indirect? Is it direct? Is it more adapting to what happens in Ukraine? because I think the government is also playing with fears in the society, fear of a war. I think that's something which is really triggering also the society. It's a very dangerous game, in my opinion, but how you would factor in here this impact of Russia. And Dorota, you mentioned leverage of the EU. I would ask all of you, what is the leverage of the EU on Georgia, on this government? And does the EU really use its leverage in supporting civil society? Because I think, sure, change can only come from within, but I think some support from outside is also needed. So Tonike, I take you. I take maybe two more, and then I would give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. My question would be also for...
Can you introduce yourself, even if I know you? Some people might not know you.
Yeah, I'm Nikuradze. I'm teaching now at Paris Institute for Political Studies, and in the past I've been Minister for European Integration of Georgia. Many years ago. So my question goes to Dorota Dlouchy from European External Service. Of course, I'm not blaming European Union for everything what's happening in Georgia, but is here any critical thinking of what European Union missed in this process? Because there were many voices starting from the very beginning when Georgian Dream came to power, indicating that there were clear signs that this government will go farther in this authoritarian path, and the links with Russia were already a matter of concern for many people. And what we saw for many years was that European Union had no policy, and they were quite happy that Georgia was disappearing from this Russia-EU quite heavy dossier already. And they were quite happy with that. And I heard in many meetings that even European Union was advising Ukraine to behave like Georgia, to have a dialogue with Russia. Okay, the territorial conflict would stay for many years, but Georgia was shown as an example for Ukraine for starting from 2015. Now we understand that it was wrong, and we made mistakes. I mean, both European Union and also maybe experts. So is here any critical thinking about what was wrong? And is it something, now I think we need clarity, because on one side, I still hear that, yeah, Georgian government wants...
Can you come to the question?
Yeah. So, please, I think my idea is to be as clear as possible now with Georgia, and to tell things directly, who is responsible for this backsliding and what will happen, and make much more clear indications about these 12 conditions also. Is it now a readiness from European side to be more clear and more explicit on these issues with the Georgian government, or will still continue in this ambiguity that is made by the Georgian government, and which is exactly the contrary what we need now? Sorry for being long.
Thank you very much. Marila wanted to ask the same question, a similar question than I asked. I just add the final question from my colleague Milan to Dorota. When is the updated assessment of the trio, including Georgia, by the commissioner expected in the council? So there's a very clear question. Maybe Dorota, we start with you, if that is fine, and go in the reversed order.
Perfect. Thank you. Let me start by saying that EU is not a big brother. We do not have power, and we are not elected by the Georgian people. We are not accountable to Georgian people, and we cannot govern Georgia instead of the governments that are elected. I think the expectations of us being so directly involved in Georgian politics are really misplaced. Because, as I said, we are not Big Brother. This is not Soviet Union, and actually you are outside of the European Union still. We can guide, inform to say what we believe it's needed to become the candidate EU member. but we will not intervene against results of the elections. We will not stop contacts with elected governments. And we will definitely, we are not in the business of changing governments. But since Georgia has constitutionally said that they would like to become, it's in the part of the constitution that this is the objective to become the EU, we will be coming and we are doing this, saying what is going against this priority of Georgia, where Georgia is not following the EU values, commitments to the EU and so on. One of the colleagues said that electoral changes are unlikely. It's, again, I'm not a Georgian politician. I don't live in Georgia. But there were many governments that fought in the EU also that they would never lose the power, and they do. So I would not be that, that it's, there's no space for democratic change. But again, this will be for Georgian people to decide to do so. We are very active with civil society. You asked whether we should not be, I think first speaker, whether we should not be more involved with civil society instead of the government. I think we are very supportive to the civil society in Georgia, both with finance, political support, dialogue and so on, but we will also not stop being active with the Georgian government, because in the end, it's the government of the day who can bring Georgia to the EU. There's no other way. On candidate status, I cannot reply, of course. First of all, half a year in the current circumstances is a lot, and everything can change. Secondly, it's 27 member states unanimous decision. So even if one member state will be against the candidate status for Georgia, this will not happen. But I think, we are also hearing that everybody, and I was in Tbilisi last week, everybody, doesn't matter what are the differences from which side of the political scene, civil society asks for the candidate status and sees it as priority. But there will be an assessment of the commission. An assessment of the commission will come in autumn. There will be oral update to the council May, June. We will see. It's in the commission hands, in DG NIR hands, and President van der Leyen. So this will become, before summer, we will update member states, and then in early autumn there will be a report. So member states will take decision based on the commission report on the meeting 12 steps. And we are with the government discussing what those 12 steps are meaning and where we are on them. So those 12 steps, plus of course, this is a political decision in the end. This is a decision based also on the assessment whether Georgia is in the place in terms of values, in terms of communication and those 12 steps to become the candidate country. But as I said, it's 27 member states to decide on this. What leverage the EU has? We are not, as I said, big brother, but there's a clear carrot. Candidate status getting closer to the EU, democratization of the country. We of course provide also financial support to Georgia, vis-a-vis going in another direction, and this is the political choice of the leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam.
Yes, I'll just shortly say a few things. I think at the end of the year, we may see like two scenarios. We receive candidate status. Georgian Dream claims that it's their merits, and it will be harder to change them via elections, I guess. And second, scenario is us not getting the candidate status and the Georgian Dream saying that, hey, Europe doesn't need us. And in this case, I think it will be up to the civil society and media, as well as our Western friends, to explain and make a clear message. Why didn't we receive it? And I believe in this case, again, we will see mass protests in the streets. And I don't know what it could lead to, but I think that will be the case. When it comes to the power of the people, I think we've seen just in the recent protests that they did manage to change something. I mean, not receiving this, not adopting this draft laws, I think is because people protested against it. And maybe the government didn't change, but it was an important development for our country. I don't know if there was any specific question to me. If you...
On civil society, there was another question in terms of...
there was this question about what can Europe do, EU do, and I always think a lot about this. I mean, I think statements stopped working on this government long ago, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They completely neglect anything. The ambassadors here or the leaders from Europe are saying what could work, I don't know, but there are talks about sanctioning Ivanishvili. And then I was at this meeting the other day where this one person put it that way, that one man actually could stop all of this. I believe that. I mean, I don't know if it actually could have a big impact, but maybe this is the way. I mean, there was this recommendation to sanction Ivanishvili, so maybe this could work. I don't know, but also I'm not in place to tell you what to do, but there are discussions on this. So yeah, I think it could be something.
Okay, and Nino, then you would, there was also a question
on
the Russia factor and also on the state of civil society.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great to take this.
Okay, there were a number of questions that I'm going to try to respond in my answer. First of all, the question was about when was if I understood it correctly, when was the turning point? And maybe it was in 2016. You know, every person has its opinion. When was it this turning point? For some of the citizens, the turning point was 2012 elections when the Georgian Dream came to power. And there are people who at the beginning were saying that this was the pro-Russian government. Well, there were statements from the ruling party since the beginning when they came to power, which was totally unacceptable for me. And I think that yes, they were really alarming statements regarding the war between Russia and Georgia and some other issues. And it was very concerning statements. But in total, you know, for a number of years, for many years, I would say until the war in Ukraine, well, more or less Georgian government's attitude and rhetoric and statements towards Russia was more or less in line with EU policy towards Russia, or even like US policy towards Russia. So there was rationale behind their behavior and statements. But I think that, you know, this government has removed its mask, I would say, after the Russian-Ukraine conflict, when our government's statements, their wording, their phrases was kind of like a copy-paste of Russian propagandists' rhetoric. Well, as for the question about cooperation of European Union with our government, what needs to be changed? Of course, I mean, you should continue cooperation with our government. I am still confident, and I want to highlight that I think I strongly believe that Georgia should receive the candidate status, and I will explain why. It's so existential for us. We understand that there are a lot of problems that we are talking about, but if we do not get the status, it will mean the victory of Russian propaganda. It will strengthen Russian influence in Georgia, and it will be a big and huge frustration for for the citizens of Georgia who are ready to physically protect their European aspirations and European values. I think that it is achievable goal, and my personal, goal and the goal of civil society groups in Georgia is to do everything possible to achieve this, goal in the end of the year. But I don't think that the EU and other donor organizations or other international, democratic unions should continue doing business with our government as usual. I think that the international community should reconsider, for instance, assistance programs specifically designed for Georgia, and there should be more assistance programs directed to civil society groups, to media particularly. Free independent media is struggling in Georgia, and they are struggling for existence, and I think that there should be directed more support, because if independent media will stop functioning, which is realistic and which is real threat for Georgia, it will be an end of all democratic, processes and hopes for Georgia. So I think that priority should be done to free and independent media, which have some, ethical problems. Maybe some of them are affiliated with opposition, but nevertheless, those are media which are openly pro-European, and without critical media, I would say democratic development in Georgia is just unrealistic. So more attention and more direct support to Georgian media, which I don't see right at the moment from our European partners or from our international community. And I also consider that, every democratic, every democratic initiative in any corner of the world needs to be supported from the democratic community. And I do really think that, yes, EU is not our big brother, but EU is an union of democratic states, and I think the democratic community should be engaged in such processes where they see that there is an attempt to establish authoritarianism, and when you see that there are people, citizens, civil society groups, media who are struggling, who are resisting, I think that yes, it is obligation of democratic community and democratic world to provide support to those democratic actors who bring democratic changes in any country. As for the civil society organizations, I think that we are and civil society groups are more united and more organized and stronger than ever. I think that the government has introduced this law because they considered that civil society was already fully discredited and demonized and weakened and fragmented. But this law and processes made civil society in Georgia even stronger, more vibrant, more united, more, there is a consensus among civil society groups, and I'm sure that, these people have plans. These people will be very active throughout the year in order to support and strengthen Georgian Euro-Atlantic aspirations and the processes. As for the Russian influence,
to come to an end, that would be the last point.
Okay, just the last comment. Yes, of course, the fear of war exists in Georgia, and this fear is realistic. This fear is not just illusionary. We remember, my generation remembers a number of armed conflicts with the Russian Federation. So obviously this fear is real, and the government tries to manipulate with this fear, but the desire of our citizens to be part of the European family is very, very strong. And I just want to send and deliver this message to our European partners that these aspirations is very strong, and we will protect our, freedoms and values. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think also very valuable points. Just one final remark from my side. I think we have to see this really also in the geopolitical and security context, which is shifting. So sure, it's about domestic developments in Georgia, but if you see what happens also in around Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the increasing role of the EU also in facilitation, but also monitoring in this conflict. EU is still active also with a monitoring mission in the Georgian conflict zones. So I think it's also important to show presence in the region, to have a really coordinated policy. I heard also from some of the member states some different statements and some support. So I think that's also a challenge inside of the EU, but I think it's also about securitization and the shift also in geopolitical shifts we can see, which impacts on relatively vulnerable countries and then also governments who tend to develop in an authoritarian direction. So I think it's really important to have this also in this context. Even I think as I started, Georgia is a key country because of its vibrant civil society, because of its path which it has taken, and the huge support also for EU integration it has since many years. So I want to thank the panelists for your speeches, for taking the questions. I really enjoyed this only female panel very much. It was really great. We put some publications also in the chat. And I would like to thank also GIP for cooperating with us, Corneli and his team, and also our colleagues from DGAP who have set this up today. So thank you very much, and see most of you next week again. Bye-bye.